We've been talking about emotion, and I want to keep talking about emotion. One thing I've often pointed out is that emotion, when we're working with emotion in the body and in the mind, we can find it very useful to know that emotion generally is a evolved pattern to generate behavior. So when the very first, like the rudimentary beginnings of emotion are all just basic desires or impulses in the biological organism to do the things that the body needs to do, the organism needs to do to survive and reproduce. That's where at the very core of it, that's where all emotions sort of come from. And they get much more complex, especially in humans, because we've got a mind and we've got different parts of the mind and we've got all these different things going on in the body, and we have older and more newer parts of the evolutionary system. But it's important to remember, okay, I'm having an emotion. It is wanting to generate a behavior. My emotion wants me to do something. I've said this many times, I'm repeating it now, but because I want to add something to it. But why is that useful? Well, when we're doing mindfulness at the deconstruction level, so let's just remind people what I mean by that. One way of practicing mindfulness, maybe the most useful way at the beginning, is to try and see the basic elements of your experience as it's happening. So essentially, we're a physicist that's looking at the atoms of reality. And we, as a mindfulness practitioner, are looking at the atoms of our experience, the basic little building blocks, the heat, the redness, the vibration, the brightness, the loudness, right? These basic sensory qualities that we have access to. And by doing that, we get underneath the stories of our life and we get into the actual present moment, because the present moment has no past, it has no future, and it has no story inside of it. The present moment is just a bunch of sensory experiences. We like to call it feel, image, sound, right? Just feel, image, talk in the head, feel, image, sound out in the world. We feel things, we see things, we hear things, we smell things, we taste things. And so that's one way to work with emotion, is you just keep deconstructing it, and that way you're underneath the story, right? You're underneath whatever your emotion is telling you is important or is bad or is good or whatever. You are practicing letting go of that story and getting into the basic building blocks. I want to remind people that this would be the first thing as a meditation practitioner, would be one of the first ways to practice with it on the cushion. Because it is very hard to work inside the story and be mindful at the same time, at least at first. It's a very advanced skill. So what we're practicing by sitting on a cushion is we're removing all the distractions. We're getting into a silent environment. We're removing anything we can do, with our phone or food or whatever to distract ourselves. And we're just practicing getting underneath our story in that very controlled environment. We keep our body still. And we do that to practice being present with as few impulses or drivers from the outside there to get us out of the present. And as you know, meditation is still very, very challenging, even when you do all that. But when you get into an argument with a person, then it's a completely different level of difficulty to stay present, right? Or when you're out in the world, or when you're tired, or when you're doing your work, or any of those things, it becomes much more difficult, because to operate in the world, we have learned a deeply learned habit of operating in the world through our story of the world. So how do we figure out what to do next? We check our story. Well, I'm a person who has a job. I got to go to the job, right? I'm a person who gets hungry and gets grumpy if I don't eat. I got to go eat some food. I'm a person who likes Fritos. I got to buy some Fritos, or whatever it is, right? There's a story there that sort of guides us through our day, every moment of it. We're checking into our general narrative and our understanding of who and what we are. And it's a biography that we're sort of carrying around with ourselves. So that's such a deep habit. And we want to start to let go of that habit. But first, we want to practice it on the cushion, because it's much more difficult when we're actually in the day. Because now it's like, how do I talk to a person without talking through my story? How do I decide what to do next without going to my story? That's it's a much more challenging question. When you're just sitting on a cushion and it's not something you have done for years, especially at the beginning, right? If you're just sitting on a cushion, okay, all your normal story stuff is sort of put in the background at least a little bit. Now, of course, we bring stories to meditation as well. I'm doing meditation. I've been a spiritual practitioner for a long time. I'm trying to accomplish this. I'm trying to let go of my feelings. So there's lots of stories we add to meditation, but we're trying to reduce it to get it as simple as possible. So when we first want to start working with our meditation our emotion by using meditation, when we first start want to do that, we want to practice deconstruction. That is the practice of letting go of the story. And in fact, you don't even have to try it. The beautiful thing about deconstruction practice, or the basic feel, image, talk kind of practice, is you don't even have to try to let go of the story. You just have to try to focus on what is actually present right now. And you will automatically be getting underneath the story. If you are really feeling the warmth and pressure of your butt on your seat cushion, if that's all you're focused in on and you're really experiencing that wholeheartedly, then there's no room for any of your story. Now, I'm not saying that's easy. It's simple thing. Just focus on that sensation. Stay with that sensation until there's nothing but that sensation. It's simple, but it's not easy. But if you're doing that, you're practicing getting underneath your story. And emotion, we say, is partly body, partly mind. Emotion is partly story. So by getting underneath the story, we start to loosen the bonds of that emotion. We start to let it to unwind. So I want to remind people that I've been talking about emotion at a fairly advanced level, but I want to remind us that there's a basic practice here that you can apply to emotion, and that is the deconstruction practice. So I want to remind people what that looks like. I'm feeling some emotion right now. Most of us will notice that in the head. I'm just anxious all the time, and we'll say, right? Or I'm angry, or whatever it is. And we'll go, okay, so how would we practice with that in mindfulness? In deconstruction? Well, we'd sit on the cushion and we'd notice, am I anxious right now? Yeah, I'm anxious. We probably notice the mind first, right? It's probably saying, well, I got all these problems. I just don't know if I know how to make a flan, right? That's what you're anxious about. And so you're worried about it, and your head's going, well, does a flan have yeast? I don't even know. And right, your head's doing that, and you can notice the talking going on. And you can notice the pictures that might be generated of your disappointment, or your family's disappointment, or the president's disappointment when the flan doesn't turn out, right? Sorry, I'm weaving an interesting story. So, that may be the place you first notice it. And you could be mindful of the mind generating those sounds and pictures, right? So it's sounds and pictures. I don't know how to make a flan. That's a sound. Where does it appear in your head? Is it being said loud, or is it being said soft? Is it being said fast, or is it being said slow? Is it your voice? Does it have your timbre of voice? Does it have somebody else's? So that's mindfulness with the mind. We're dropping in deconstructing the experience of these sentences into pure music. And we could do the same thing with the images. I have an image of my disappointed face. Okay, what colors is it? Where is it? Usually our internal images are pretty wavy. They're sort of floating around. They're a little vague. They're blurry. Look at those things. Is there color? Is it disappearing? Is it appearing? Is it reappearing? We start to look at it as a movie on a screen, as a shadow cast on a wall. You see, we start to drop underneath the story. Now, as we get a little more practice, we generally recommend going to the body first, because the body is a little easier to avoid getting into the story again. And it's also sort of the part of the iceberg that's under the water, the 90% that's under the water of our emotion. It's mostly in the body. If we're having strong emotions or repetitive emotions, or we feel stuck in an emotion, it's the most of that's in the body, and it manifests in the mind. So then we go and feel in the body. I'm feeling anxious. And when we feel anxious in the body, for instance, there's a sort of sense of not liking how it feels. And so what do we practice with deconstruction, with mindfulness, with deconstruction here, is we just go and feel what it actually is. It's just coolness. It's just vibration. It's just constriction or expansion. It's just a shape and a location in our body. And we let go of our story that it's anxiety even. We let go of our story that it's bad. We let go of a story that it's about flan or whatever. And that is how we could practice working with our emotion with deconstruction. It's a way of being with our emotion, but being with its atoms rather than getting lost in our story of what it is. When we do this, we are literally deconstructing the emotion. That is, the emotion stops having its self-replicating power. What do I mean by that? When we have an emotion, for instance, let's say anxiety, especially an emotion that's looping or an emotion we have all the time or emotion that just won't go away, it is feeding itself. So you might have some anxiety in the body. We talked about this last week. You have some anxiety in the body, and it generates some thoughts like, oh God, I'm going to die. And then it generates some pictures of you like having a body die, right? And then those pictures make your body go, oh my God, we're going to die. And the body gets all activated. And it feeds on itself. These three parts of us, are two different parts of the mind and the body, keep goosing each other to keep the loop going. And you know, right, when you get to the end of a day where you were anxious all day, you're exhausted, because there's energy going in to keep regenerating the emotion. And when we free ourselves from an emotion, when we really heal an emotion, we get so much energy in our lives. So by deconstructing, what we do is we get so underneath the story that they can't goose each other anymore. Does that make sense? Because, and that's sort of what I already described, but I'm just going to describe it again. Yeah, good. So when the thought arises, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose all my money if I don't get this flan right, that's a scary thought, and it activates fear in the body. If instead you're just going, there's a sound in my head, that doesn't have the meaning anymore, right? You've gotten underneath the story, the scary story, and the body doesn't have to get triggered by it anymore. It's going, oh, there's just a person, like a person on the bus saying something about flan. It doesn't matter. It's got a pitch. There's a certain vocal quality to it. And by getting underneath the story, you stop the loop. Now, again, this is simple to describe. It's not necessarily easy to practice because we are very addicted to our mind and our feelings. We're addicted to the narrative that organizes them. And we don't really feel safe unless we're telling ourselves the narrative to keep everything organized. So when we drop underneath the story and the narrative, we are letting go of this safety blanket, which is the story of how everything fits together. And that's a little bit challenging at first, but it's simple. Just go feel what you're feeling, see what you're seeing, hear what you're hearing at the level of sensation. Okay, so that's the basic technique for working with our emotion. Now, I'm going to go now back up to a level of more advanced, but I want to make sure everything I'm about to say now is sort of helpful and important as you get deeper and deeper into this. But at least the way we're working with the practice, this deconstructing thing should be the first thing that you have under your belt as you work with these things. And later on, as you're doing more advanced things, don't forget that. Like, oh, I'm having a lot of trouble. Okay, go back to it's just feeling in the body. It's just sounds in the head. It's just pictures in the head. Okay. So one thing I've been saying, so then an obstacle to healing our emotions as we proceed with this kind of practice is that there will be things we do not notice in our body and mind that are important parts of the emotion. So I can tell you, just look at the sounds, look at the pictures, and look at the body, and that will work if you look at all the sounds in your head, all the pictures in your head, and all the feelings in your body. But there are very subtle things that go on that you might not notice. Mostly they are subtle forms of blockage or resistance that are keeping you from feeling the whole thing or hearing the whole thing or seeing the whole thing. This is actually a big part of meditation, of advancement in meditation, is realizing that whatever is causing you suffering is unconscious. To some degree. And as we start to meditate, we must start to make it a little more conscious, and there'll be a little less suffering, and we make it a little more conscious. But the fact that it's unconscious means you might not know where to look to heal it. Now, we try to give you a way in, right? What you do is you just follow the sounds that are present. You follow the feelings that are present. You follow the pictures that are present. That is the way to dive into the pattern so that eventually, as you go down that path, you will uncover all the parts that are unconscious. That is the deconstructing method, and it will work. But it won't work like this necessarily for most people, because you have to sort of take each step. You have to uncover what is being hidden. The words you're not catching, the feelings in the body or the blockage in the body you're not noticing. So Abby just gave a great quote. It's I'll just pass it along because it's so nice. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. It's a classic Jung quote. Abby says it's credited to Jung. I've always heard it as Jung as well. But until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Whether you call it fate or not, it's true. Whatever is unconscious is the thing that's sort of running your life, running the show. And in particular, it's causing the suffering. So what we're doing is we're through deconstruction trying to peel back the layers and see whatever is there. So deconstruction will get to all these blockages eventually, but there are some things we can do at different levels of mindfulness, meaning higher up the ladder, closer to the narrative, that can speed up opening pockets of unconsciousness in us. So when I say it's useful to know that your emotion is requiring a behavior or is asking for you to do something, what I'm saying is, okay, go a little higher. So get out of deconstruction mode, go a little higher into motivation mode, into desire and belief. So your emotion could also be thought of desires and beliefs, but desires and beliefs are a little more conceptual, right? They're not just basic sensations. And if you can sort of identify the desire and accept it and allow it to move, then you might get to some of those pockets that are hidden more efficiently. And I think you've all noticed this, especially the people in Zoom. Sometime I'll be working with you, or I'll be working with someone else. You can watch this happen. And they'll be talking about some problem they're having or difficulty. And I'll just say, well, what is it? What is the feeling you're having? Let's actually name it. And that can just do it. So naming a feeling is already conceptual. So it's a little bit higher up the ladder. So you might say, yeah, it seems like anxiety. And then I'll say, well, say I am anxious. Say I am anxious. And I get them to say, I am anxious. And that starts to flow, because there's little blockages that are unconscious that they're saying, it's not good to be anxious. It's not good to be anxious. I don't want to admit I'm anxious, even though you're up there talking about it. So when you say I am anxious, you start to open up parts of the system that are blocked, that you might not be conscious of. And then I'll say, what does your anxiety want? Oh, I don't know. Well, think about it for a second. Well, just take a guess. I guess it wants this. It wants me to curl up in a ball. All right, so now say I want to curl up in a ball. And you say I want to curl, and again, you might start to get flowing. You might get you opening up parts of it, because the emotion wants to be heard. The emotion wants a behavior to happen that's not happening, and that's where the blockage in the emotion is happening. So understanding the conceptual structure of your emotion, it can be very useful. And there's basic, but keeping it basic really helps. So it wants something. It wants you to do something. It has a behavior associated with it. It would like you to move, think, talk in some way. This is just a way of getting past resistance to the emotion that may be hidden, even as you're doing deconstructing practice. So it's really important to notice this as you're doing your deconstruction practice. If you're getting more tense as you're doing your deconstruction practice, right back to just feeling, feel, image, talk. If your body's getting more tense, then there's a hidden blockage. There's a hidden resistance that you're just practicing even as you're doing the mindfulness, right? So you're not paying attention to that tension. You're not paying attention to that resistance. So it's a good time to go, okay, to either go feel that resistance or find it, or to move up a level and just get some other ways to get things to flow. So I invite you people, when you people, that sounded like you people. I invite you to, when you are working with an emotion, just to do some simple things like, all right, well, let's just name the emotion. Can you name it without getting too analytic or like having to be right? Can you just be like, all right, maybe it's fear, and just put a maybe in front of it. Maybe I'm scared. That's good. Just give it a little bit give it a name. What does my emotion want me to do? How would it want my body to move, or how would it want me to change the world, or whatever? Just very simply, what does it want me to do? And that's a way of listening to the emotion. So this is what I wanted to add. I've said this before. Hopefully today is a little more clear. But there's a second thing that emotions are evolved to do, which I haven't really mentioned before. I hadn't really thought about it, honestly, at least not explicitly. Emotion, especially in humans, but in almost all animals, are also designed to communicate. So you'll often hear me say that the emotion just needs to be heard. I will say, listen to your emotion. So that will do most of the healing. And the reason for that is that evolutionarily, again, our emotions are largely communicative to our tribe or whatever. And we know this because I can look at a person's face and know what emotion they're feeling. Why would that be? Because we've evolved a language of emotion, and that a language is older than language of the mind, the language of talk language, right? It's designed to let your tribe know what's going on with you, what you want, what you need, what's happened to you. Oh my gosh, they're hurt. They're crying. Oh my gosh, they're angry. I need to avoid them, or I need to figure out. Laughing. Oh my gosh, everything's okay. It wasn't, most laughter, like you stub your toe and then laugh. That's not a good one because stepping into a never makes me laugh. But someone trips and then they laugh, right? It's because the thing that seemed dangerous or was going to be bad wasn't bad, and now we have relief. So the laughter lets everyone know you're okay. So these emotions are designed to be heard, and we really don't get our emotions heard in this culture, in our society, a lot of the time. So there's a lot of emotions that are stuck in us going, no one ever listened to me when I was sad. Nobody ever listened to me when I was scared. Nobody ever took care of me, right? When I needed it. And so what do those emotions need? They need to be heard. So that's part of what we're practicing here is, well, what does my emotion want to say to me? So I'm giving you some questions here. What is the name of the emotion? Let's just name it. If we can't name it, that's okay. And if we do name it, we don't need to be dogmatic about it. The emotion is much more subtle than any name we can give it, but we'll give it a name to sort of show that we're on board with it. What does it want me to do? What behavior does it encouraging? What would it like me to curl up in a ball? Would it like me to go out for a run? Would it like me to yell at somebody? What does it want me to do? It doesn't mean we necessarily do it, but we listen to what it wants us to do, and we can work with it at that point. What does it want to say? What does the emotion want to say? What does it want me to hear? What does it want me to hear? That's a third important question you could ask your emotion. And you can ask that in different ways. What do you need? You could just ask the emotion, what do you need? It's a way of encouraging it to talk. A good question to ask yourself is, what do you need? And you'll hear something and then listen to that. Okay, I hear that. And then, is there anything more? It's a really good question to ask yourself. Because we have a habit of trying to get to the answer and solution very quickly. And that is actually a way of shutting ourselves and other people up. Okay, we don't want to be having this difficult conversation. So what is it you need? Okay, all right, I got it. But that's not a space of feeling really heard. You need to, especially with difficult things, you need to create this space of, okay, is there anything more? Is there more you need to tell me? Is there more I haven't heard yet? Now, the very danger here again is that we get into a very narrative story kind of part of the world. So we want to keep dropping back into deconstruction as we're doing this. We ask the question, we allow it to flow, we hear it, and then we go into the feeling, the seeing, the hearing. The goal isn't to, by asking these questions, the goal is not to literally intellectually understand what's going on with your emotions. That's really not the goal. It might happen, often does, you'll get insights, but the goal is to allow the emotion to flow in the way it healthily wants to flow, the way it never got to flow. So the goal is to create the space for emotional healing. It's not to figure something out intellectually and solve it. It's very important to that's actually a very important thing to bring into your practice. And the only example comes to mind right now, and I will think about this, I'll come up with better examples, but if you're teaching someone to ride a bike, you can give them a few instructions, right? I doubt any of us really remember the mental process going into riding a bike, but it doesn't matter how many people tell you what to do. You don't understand how to ride a bike until you're riding the bike, right? You're like, oh, I've got it. It's not because your mind understands it. It's because your body suddenly understands it. Your body gets the balance. That's what we're trying to do here with the emotion. We want to learn to ride our emotion like riding a bike. We want to let it roll and flow. And we think it's all about solving the problems the emotion is worried about. It's about understanding the story. It's going, what did my mother do to me? And again, that can be useful in getting this thing to flow for us to ride, but that's not what it's about. What it's about is literally riding the emotion to its healthy conclusion without controlling it, just riding, just balanced on it. So we've been talking about emotion for a few weeks here, and we're coming at it from different directions. But the first thing we said today was remember deconstruction. That's our first practice as mindful. We're trying to get underneath the story. It gives us some freedom from the normal narrative of the emotion. So that's our baseline practice. As we start to work with an emotion more often, we can start to add in a few questions. We can name the emotion. We can ask what it wants, how it wants to behave, like what behavior it's asking for, and we can ask what it wants to say or what it wants to communicate. Perfect. So let's sit.